a living history production.
I'm Matt McLachlan.
And I'm Pete Smith.
We're battlefield historians who love nothing better than getting out and walking the ground where great battles in history took place.
And now we'd like you to come with us. Every week, BattleWalks will take you to one of the great battlefields of Europe.
As we walk the ground, we'll dig through the pages of history, we'll uncover the secrets of the battlefields, and most importantly, we'll tell the stories of the people who fought and died there.
Welcome to BattleWalks.
Hello everybody, welcome to BattleWalks. My name is Peter Smith. I'm by myself today. I haven't got my colleague Matt McLachlan with me because this is going to be one of my out and about podcasts. So we're going to be literally on the ground, which is where I am at the moment. So where am I? Well, I'm not even in France, which is where I normally base myself. I've crossed over the channel and I'm on the Sussex Downs, just looking down on the town of Brighton, coastal town of Brighton. The reason I'm here, well, I've actually popped across the channel. Thankfully, we can travel a little bit easier now. Popped across the channel to visit my son. And whilst here, I thought I'd take the opportunity to come across to the coast and have a look at the Chattery Memorial. So this is where we are. If I sound like I'm slightly out of breath, it's because I am, because I've just literally walked up a hill for a couple of kilometres from the road. It might even be further than that. It certainly feels further than that. So I'm right on the top of the Sussex Downs, about 500 feet above sea level, and the location is a place called Holt Hill. The nearest town or little village that we're near to is a place called Patcham. So let's have a walk around this memorial. So this memorial is very Indian looking. That's what I'll say straight away, and there's obviously going to be a reason for that. The Chattri Memorial is relevant to the Indian soldiers who fought and died for the Empire during the First World War. So it's almost a little minaret, octagon shaped. It's actually built out of marble, partly out of marble. And it's a very important site for those Indian soldiers who came here, because it's where the cremations were done. Unusually, we're used to burials, and that's all we talk about on most of these podcasts, one way or another. We're at a Commonwealth War Graves cemetery, but not this time. This is where Indian soldiers, both Hindus and Sikhs, were brought up here to be cremated if they died on one of the hospitals close to here. And that's what we're also going to be talking about during this podcast, is the famous Brighton Pavilion. We're going to walk down to that and have a chat about that after we've finished up here. So Brighton Pavilion, middle of the town, along with two other locations. One was a school that was converted into a hospital, and one, I believe, was a workhouse, also converted into a hospital. So three hospital complexes, particularly picked to take wounded Indian soldiers coming across from the Western Front. The date time we're looking at is 1914-1915. That's when Indian soldiers predominantly were fighting on the Western Front. After that, they are moved across to fight in Mesopotamia. So no longer do the wounded come here. In fact, they went straight back to India. So Indian soldiers coming here, sadly some of them dying, and they are brought up here onto this beautiful site up on the top of the Sussex Downs, and they are cremated here. So this commemorates the site of the funeral pyres that were here for the Indian soldiers. It was an important site for them, and is an important site still for Indians who are commemorating the war. And it's an important site for us. It's just, I have to say, this is the first time I've been, and I actually couldn't find it to start off with. I found it very difficult. For some reason, I thought that we could drive fairly close. You cannot. It's quite a hike to get here, and uphill. But well worth the view. The views across onto the coastline and overlooking Brighton itself, and to in fact a wind farm beyond. You can actually see a wind farm beyond. So let's do a little bit of the details of here. So as I said, 500 feet above sea level. The first cremations took place here on the 31st of December 1914, and the last one on the 30th of December 1915. So a year of cremations taking place here. 53 soldiers, Indian soldiers, were cremated here. And we have 21 others, Muslims in fact, who are buried, and they were buried in Woking. They're no longer there, and there's a podcast in its own right of this site. It's a very sad little site. In fact, it became very run down, and eventually the Commonwealth War Graves decided that they would exhume the bodies from the site in Woking and move them to the Brookwood burial ground that has a large military section there, and they were buried there. So 53 soldiers cremated here, and I just like that imagery, I suppose, of most of you will be aware that cremations are done for Hindus and Sikhs in India, and that imagery of them up on the downs here in these beautiful views around here, the solemn processions bringing them up here for them to be cremated, having been taken from the hospitals. I'm going to just read an article in the Brighton that was written in the Brighton Herald, and this was at the period when they were thinking of building this memorial here. To those who do not know the history, this Chattri, so essentially Indian in general design and in every detail, may seem a thing alien to the open downland scenery in which it is set. It is artistically appropriate that it should be so, for east came to west in a strange romantic way when on these Sussex downs the ashes were burned of Hindu warriors born in remote villages in faraway Hindustan, for whom the wildest imagination could never have suggested at their birth that their funeral fires would be fanned by the winds that swept these Sussex hills. So I think that's just a beautiful way of putting it, and that was basically in the Brighton Herald when they were preparing for the ceremonies for the building of this, the completion and inauguration of this wonderful memorial. As I said, built from Sicilian marble and octagonal base, 8 pillars. And it's just a lovely memorial. The seats all around it, and that's what I'm sitting in at the moment. I need to. And I say, looking out over the downs, just to give you an idea, there's little stairways leading up to it, so you can sit on the stairs, or there are seats facing it, seats behind it, seats looking out to sea. So it's a wonderful place to come. I'm actually sitting on a seat very close, tucked into the memorial, because I'm trying to get out of the wind, because it affects the microphone. But a lovely location. So how did this happen? How did this end up being buried here? How were the soldiers actually cremated here? Well, it was immediately when it was decided that Brighton should become the centre of the care of wounded Indian soldiers. Then it became fairly obvious that not all of them would survive, and a location needed to be picked for. Firstly, it was thought that they would be buried, but then I think we did the right thing. We decided that it was necessary to build these burning ghats, because that's what the term is. They're called burning ghats, and I think 4 burning ghats were actually placed up here. It was actually inaugurated by the Prince of Wales. He came up here to inaugurate it, and he was very honoured to do so, which is interesting just in its own right, that he wanted to come up here. And this is what he wrote. We are here met to dedicate a memorial to brave men, our fellow subjects, who after the fire and stress of Flanders received the last sacred rites of their religion on this high eminence. It is benefiting that we should remember, and that future generations should not forget, that our Indian comrades came when our need was highest. Free men, voluntary soldiers who were true to their salt and gave their lives in a quarrel, which it was enough for them to know that the enemy were the foes of their sahibs, their empire and their king. It was a great adventure to them to leave home and a congenial climate, to pass over the black water, and to give all in a conflict which the issues were to most of them strange and impersonal. He goes on, in conclusion, though this is purely a memorial to the Hindu and Sikh soldiers, I am thinking too of the Mohammedan soldiers who passed away in your care. These men were buried with all military honours at Woking. I hear that before long a gate of oriental character, the gifts of Indians, will adorn the pavilion. Now that has happened as well. The pavilion has a beautiful gateway into it. Now we'll talk about that a little later. Rudyard Kipling was also in attendance here. Now, to enhance the site, the Commonwealth War Graves, so we are going to talk about the Commonwealth War Graves, decided that they should build a memorial here as well. And the Patcham Down Indian Forces Cremation Memorial is just below the memorial itself. So this was actually was a group of Indians who lobbied for it to be built, and eventually in 2009 the Commonwealth War Graves decided that it was appropriate to commemorate the names of the dead Indian soldiers at the cremation site. So they are actually commemorated here, and they're all named, which I think was a very good idea to have them named on this memorial itself. So I can highly recommend that you do the walk that I've done, that you walk up to the site here. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to walk back down to my car. We certainly can't walk all the way into Brighton from here, it's too far. But we're going to walk down into Brighton, and then we're going to stand in front of the Brighton Pavilion, and we'll have a chat about the Brighton Pavilion and why Indian soldiers will be brought here in 1914. So I'll talk to you again in a minute. So here we are. We're standing outside the Royal Pavilion. I'm just going to go into the grounds and again find somewhere where I can sit down. So just move across under this tree here. So the Royal Pavilion. How on earth do I describe the Royal Pavilion? Well, let's talk about its history. I think we'll start off with a little bit of its history. It was built between 1787 and 1823. And it has the design as if it should be in really a fantasy setting. It looks like something from Disneyland, to be honest. It's a mixture of Indian style, so something you'd expect the Mughal emperors to have built, with a little bit of Chinese in there. It's a most astounding building, really, I suppose. Basically, it's something that George IV wanted. He wanted a palace to be built on the coast, and it is the start of I suppose, Brighton itself becoming what it still is today, a great holiday location, very cosmopolitan. If you haven't been to Brighton, it's a lovely place to come to. Lots of bookshops here, I hasten to add. So it was of his design. It's what he wanted, something spectacular, and it was adorned spectacularly, but its fall was fairly dramatic. Queen Victoria didn't like it at all, and when she basically inherited it as one of the royal palaces, she said, no, I'm not into this at all. She wanted Osborne on the Isle of Wight, and that's what she got. And she decided that some of the fittings and features in here should be removed. So it's a decline, a steady decline. Things being removed from it, taken elsewhere. And so eventually it's the people of Brighton that really get fed up of it being taken to bits and decide that they want it. They don't want it pulling down. They want it as it is. And so it became the property of the town of Brighton. And they then decide that they would like to enhance it themselves. And actually, Queen Victoria decided that perhaps some of the bits should be given back. And so she gave some bits back. And in recent years, I have to say, an awful lot of what was taken from it, from its original building, has been returned. And it now is a beautiful palace again inside, and well worth a visit. It's rather expensive to go in. We're not going to go inside. We're going to stay outside. But it's well worth. And just walking around it from the outside and just looking at it is it's spectacular. So it's now been restored, but why does it become a hospital during the Great War? Well, again, as we've been discussing earlier, it was decided that a place was needed for wounded Indian soldiers to be hospitalised, to be cared for, and basically a commission decided to have a look and see what was suitable, and the Mayor of Brighton offered it. He basically offered it and said, look, this building looks spectacular, it looks marginally Indian. To our eye now it seems very condescending that we should pick something that looks Indian and think that Indian soldiers would feel happy to be in there. I have to say, when you read any accounts or anything written about it, it didn't feel condescending at the time, and it was done with good intentions, I think. And so we have to look at I like to look at it from that point of view, that this wasn't condescending. They picked a building that looked Indian because they felt that it would suit Indian soldiers. So that's what happens, and they also picked the Brighton Workhouse, as I said earlier, and a school to give them enough space for the beds. The dome itself, there's a big dome in the middle of the pavilion itself, where it had beds or capable to take the beds of 1,500 beds could be laid out on the floor there. So as we can see, this was not going to be a small hospital. It's going to be a large location, and along with the Brighton workhouse then and the school. So ambulance trains would come here, and during the war they carried over 30,000 Indian soldiers were brought here to this area to be operated on, rested, in some cases returned to the war, but in others this will be where they, sadly, as we know, they will finally find their final resting place here. So the first contingent arrived on the 5th of December and were taken to the Royal Pavilion, and then the second contingent arrived on the 14th of December. To much excitement, by then they realised that Indian troops were arriving here, and so people were waiting. The streets were lined. People wanted to see these Indian soldiers arriving here, and to be looked after in their hospital. Because remember, this pavilion, this beautiful building. I'm going to describe it a little bit more. It needs a little bit more describing. It looks a little bit like, if you imagine the minarets, these towers on top of it look like upturned onions, I suppose. That would be a good description of them. But it's just an extraordinary building, beautifully coloured, and I love it. So, hospital beds. The Indian soldiers are going to be put into these beds. And so I'm going to read another excerpt from the Brighton Gazette, this one dated December the 16th in 1914. At last the wounded Indians are duly installed at Brighton. They arrived under rather mournful conditions, a drab day, rainstorms and a fierce sea running in the channel, mud-laden streets and a vista of dripping umbrellas and mackintoshes. That was the first impression the warriors got of Brighton, and it was rather chilling, but crowds assembled to voice public welcome, and the reception undoubtedly cheered the brave fellows. The 100 stretcher cases in the first train that reached the terminus on Monday afternoon constituted perhaps the most distressing of the many pathetic sights seen on similar occasions during the past 4 months. Something akin to a feeling of awe was created by the silence with which the work of bringing them out of the train and placing them in the motor ambulances was carried out. So, yes, it became a place of safety. Civilians would often wait outside to get glimpses of them, and you can see pictures of these guys. I'll try and find some of these pictures to put on the Facebook page associated with the site, and we can see people standing outside looking at these Indian soldiers as they walk in and out. I'm now going to read you a lovely little article I found, and this is written by an author. And it's called The Indian Hospital, and it was written by an English novelist called Alfred Ollivant, and it's about his visit to the hospital. I won't read the whole thing because it goes on a little bit, but it just gives you an idea of what the people felt at the time. When George IV, then Prince of Wales, designed this pavilion by the sea and turned the little fishing village into the fashionable watering place, he never surely dreamt of the use to which his great-great-nephew would put its halls and gardens a century later. A tall brown stockade surrounds the gardens now. Over it you see the domes and minarets and ornate roofs, not of an eastern palace as you might expect, but of the pleasure house of an English king. As we drove up to the gate, a man in khaki stopped us. The motor slid on through the garden and drew up at the entrance. On the seats by the lawns, under the elms, figures were sitting, strange indeed, and yet not entirely out of place in that semi-oriental environment. Men in blue coats and trousers, those are the hospital blues that wounded soldiers wore. Brown men with white puggarees bound round their heads. One came hobbling down the path on crutches, swinging a big foot as a punching ball by reason of its bandages. The doctor, a major, for the purposes of this war, was beckoning me from the door. I followed him, catching as he entered a glimpse of an old board on one side of the entrance. On it, painted in letters dingy with age and weather, were the words Royal Pavilion. These floors, which of old answered to the nimble feet of courtiers, the swish of ladies' skirts, echo now to the stump of crutches, the slithering of slippered feet, and the shuffle of carrying parties bearing patients to and fro from the operating theatres set up in what was the old, perhaps, pantry. In the entrance lobby, there was a group of brown men. Some were playing cards and some were watching the players. With their dark faces and red scarves bound about their heads, an occasional crutch or peep of white bandage, they looked like a jolly pack of pirates out of one of Stevenson's books. But surely no cutthroats ever looked so happy or grinned with such utter honesty. Gherkas, said the doctor in my ear. Ripping little beggars, full of fun and so game. I like the wording in this report. It's of its time. We moved down a long passage in which brown men in blue lolled about and limped, and white men in brown bustled. That's the orderlies, the medical personnel. For in this hospital, with its hundreds of beds, the nursing is of necessity done by men. There were some women here, but not many, and they were many of the matrons who were here. At the end of each bed is hung a board, and on the board is the record of the man's name, regiment, and nature of his wound. We move from bed to bed. Here a splendid young Sikh, his hair loose from its rings and flowing about his neck in glorious black rivulets. There a Gherka boy, aged 18, oiling his scalpy locks. He grins at us like a friendly bullpup as we pass. The Dogra, in the bed hard by, handles a little leather purse that lies at the bedside and beckons us. Bullet, he says, bullet, and he shows us the jagged bit of copper that the doctor has extracted from his body. I won't read more. If you can track it down, it's well worth reading. There's an awful lot of information there. I'm not going to do much more. I think this is it's just a short podcast. It just gives you an idea of what there is to see. That's not perhaps what you're normally used to expecting either Matt or myself to talk about. As I say, it's unusual that I'm in England. I'm going to try and find a few more places to do little podcasts about. But up on the hills, on those Sussex Downs, looking down, it's just so worth it, and tying it in with a visit to the hospital. And please do go inside. Don't think that you have to go stand outside. It's just I'm not going in. It'd be quite noisy in there, and I wouldn't be able to record inside. So I prefer to be on the outside of the building. But link the two together. Think about the Indian soldiers who were here for that year from 1914 to 1915, and their experience of being here in England. It must have been so extraordinary for a lot of them. First of all, Flanders and fighting the Germans there in the mud, and then coming here and where they're trying to give them a little bit of a home from home. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed that brief interview to Brighton and these two locations, and we'll talk again soon.